there's a painting that was never finished. In it, a family stands together. Hades, lord of the underworld, actually smiling. Persephone, queen of spring, cradling an infant wrapped in saffron cloth. And beside them, a young man with mismatched eyes gazing at his newborn sister with protective warmth. This is Zagreus, and this moment of happiness cost him hundreds of deaths to earn. The artist's brush never returned. Before the paint could dry, time itself shattered everything. That infant grew up to become a weapon, trained from birth to kill the titan who stole her family. Her name is Melinoë, and she never knew the brother in that painting, never knew her parents, never knew anything except one purpose: death to Chronos. But here's what makes this story strange. Before Melinoë ever met her brother in person, they were already working together. Across time, through a mirror that shouldn't be able to do what it does. Past and future, collaborating to change destiny itself. And the ending? The controversial choice that has the Hades community divided? That comes down to a single question neither sibling can answer definitively. Can family violence ever truly be healed, or do some betrayals run too deep for forgiveness? Tonight, we'll trace how two children of death refused to stay dead in spirit, how a brother and sister separated by catastrophe found each other across impossible distances, and how their connection would lead to one of gaming's most debated endings. Settle in, let your breathing slow, and prepare to descend through two intertwined journeys that span games, timelines, and the very nature of what family means when you've been torn apart before you ever had a chance to be whole. The rebellious prince who changed everything. Long before the unfinished portrait, before Melinoë was even a possibility, the House of Hades was cold. Not physically cold, the underworld doesn't work that way, but emotionally distant, administrative, efficient. A place where death was processed with the same bureaucratic precision as any mortal government office, just with more immortals and significantly better architecture. In this atmosphere lived Zagreus, son of Hades and Persephone, though he didn't know about the latter half of that equation for most of his life. He believed his mother was Nyx, the primordial goddess of night, and while she had raised him with genuine affection, there was always something just slightly off about that explanation. A truth hovering just beyond reach. The truth came through mischief. One night, with Hypnos' help, Zagreus snuck into his father's private chambers while everyone slept. What he found there, a letter mentioning someone named Persephone, changed everything. His actual mother. A mother who had left for reasons Hades refused to explain even when confronted. And thus began an obsession that would reshape the underworld itself. Zagreus decided to escape, to find Persephone, to understand why his family had fractured before he ever knew it was supposed to be whole. And his father, Lord Hades himself, stood in his way. Literally. At the end of every escape attempt, after fighting through Tartarus, Asphodel, and Elysium, Zagreus had to face his own father in combat. He died. A lot. Hundreds of times Zagreus died trying to escape. To Megaera's whip, to the bone Hydra's flames, to Theseus and Asterius' combined assault, and time and again to his father's overwhelming power. But death, for the son of Hades, was never permanent. He'd wake up in the underworld's river of blood, emerge from the pool, and immediately start planning his next attempt. This stubbornness, this refusal to accept that some doors stay closed, would become crucial to understanding what happens later with his sister. Through his countless attempts, Zagreus formed bonds that changed the underworld's culture. He romanced both Thanatos and Megaera, proving that love could exist even between those on opposite sides of a conflict. He reunited Orpheus and Eurydice, bringing joy to shades who had resigned themselves to eternal separation. He befriended everyone from the cheerful, boulder-pushing Sisyphus to the grumpy ferryman Charon. And eventually, after hundreds of deaths, he reached the surface, found his mother, learned the truth. He had died as an infant. Nyx had bargained with the fates themselves to bring him back, and his parents' separation came from a complicated tangle of prophecy, pain, and misunderstanding. But here's the crucial part. The thing that makes Zagreus different from typical heroes. He didn't defeat his father. He convinced him. Through persistence and honest conversation, Zagreus brought Persephone home and healed his family's wounds. Hades and Persephone reconciled. Father and son went from enemies to something approaching friends. The house of Hades, while still fundamentally a realm of death, became warmer. Relationships formed where before there had been only duty. Even Hades himself, rigid and formal as he remained, learned to express affection in his own awkward way. And then Persephone became pregnant again. The brief golden age, and why it couldn't last. When Melinoë was born, everyone celebrated. This time they told themselves things would be different. They'd learned from their mistakes. The fates had decreed Hades would have no heir, but Zagreus had already defied that prophecy just by existing. Surely they could do it again. The painting was commissioned to mark this moment, the whole family together. Hades, Persephone, Zagreus, and infant Melinoë. It captures something rare, a genuinely happy family of gods. Hades is smiling, not his usual administrative grimace, but real warmth. Zagreus looks at his baby sister with immediate protective affection. Persephone radiates contentment. They spoke during those sitting sessions about Melinoë's future, how she'd grow up surrounded by family who loved her, how Zagreus would teach her to fight, to navigate the complexities of being both a child of life and death, how she'd never know the loneliness he'd felt, would never have to wonder about her place in the world. For a time, months, perhaps a year, the records aren't clear. This future seemed guaranteed. But deep in Tartarus, in the lightless pit where the Titans had been imprisoned after their defeat in the Great War, something was stirring. Chronos, the Titan of Time, father of Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus, had been torn apart after his children's rebellion. Literally dismembered, his essence scattered throughout the deepest darkness, and guarded by the very sun who had led the revolution against him. For eons, he'd been nothing. Fragments without consciousness, power without form. Until a cult of loyal satyrs, bearing the hourglass symbol, began gathering those scattered pieces. The details of how they succeeded remain murky, wrapped in temporal paradoxes and the kind of magic that shouldn't be possible. What we know is this. They performed rituals in secret, called upon forgotten powers, and slowly, carefully, Chronos reformed. But he wasn't the same Titan who had been defeated. Imprisonment had changed him, focused him. He'd studied his own nature during those eons of fragmented awareness, learned to manipulate time in ways he'd never mastered before. Now he could freeze moments, lock beings in temporal stasis, move through stopped time while everyone else remained frozen. And he burned with one purpose: revenge against the children who had torn him apart. None of the gods saw it coming. Not Hades, despite all his oversight of Tartarus. Not Hecate, despite being specifically tasked with detecting threats. Not even the fates, weavers of destiny, seemed to predict or prevent what happened next. The warning came too late. It always came too late when you're fighting someone who controls time itself. The night that changed everything, the first twist. Hecate felt it first, a wrongness in the flow of reality, time shuddering like a struck bell. She moved through the house of Hades with increasing urgency, searching for the source. Then Chronos was simply there, as if he'd always been there, as if time had folded to accommodate his presence. The Titan towered over the gods, his dark grey skin marked with golden scars from his dismemberment. In his hands, he carried his curved golden scythe, the same weapon that had been used to tear him apart, now reclaimed. "My children," Chronos said, his voice carrying the weight of eons. "How long has it been? Though I suppose that question carries little meaning when speaking to time itself." The house of Hades erupted into chaos. Hades confronted his father. Persephone stood between them and the nursery where Melinoë slept. Zagreus drew his weapons. But Chronos had prepared for this. With a gesture, he froze time around Hades mid-attack, locking the Lord of the Underworld in crystalline stasis. One by one, the household fell the same way. Not killed. Chronos wanted them alive, wanted them imprisoned just as he had been imprisoned, wanted them to understand powerlessness while time flowed on without them. Zagreus, who had died and returned hundreds of times, found that death offered no escape. Chronos froze him before death could claim him, suspended in that moment of almost ending forever. Persephone, fighting with a mother's fury, was frozen reaching for the nursery door, her fingers eternally inches from her goal. The house of Hades fell in seconds, but Hecate wasn't frozen. Whether through her own nature as a Titan goddess, through her connection to liminal spaces between moments, or through sheer force of will, she remained free, and she knew exactly what she had to do. She had minutes, maybe seconds. Hecate rushed to the nursery. Melinoë was awake, her mismatched eyes, one green, one red, mirror opposite to her brother's coloring, watching with impossible awareness. Hecate gathered the infant, wrapped her more securely. Then she grabbed the unfinished painting from the wall and Hypnos from a nearby room. He was asleep, as always, and she later joked she only saved him because he happened to be there, though the truth was more complicated. The escape was desperate. Hecate fled to the crossroads, a liminal space she'd used for her duties, neither here nor there, existing in gaps between worlds. It was the only place she knew where even Chronos' power over time might struggle to reach. Behind her, the house of Hades fell silent. Chronos had won. He'd imprisoned his children and taken control of the underworld. He searched for the infant. Prophecy spoke of a second child of Hades who would bring about his downfall, but the crossroads kept their secrets well. In that between space, surrounded by mists, Melinoë cried, and Hecate, holding the infant who represented both the destruction of everything she'd known and the only hope for restoration, made a decision that would shape the next 2 decades. Melinoë would become a weapon. The prophecy said she would overthrow Chronos, but prophecies weren't guarantees. They were possibilities requiring action. Hecate would train this child from infancy, pour every ounce of her knowledge into forging the perfect Titan Slayer. "Death to Chronos," Hecate whispered, and it was prayer, promise, and curse combined. The weapon they made, understanding Melinoë. Melino's earliest memories were of magic, not family. While other divine children played, she learned to draw summoning circles. While others explored safe gardens, she trained with weapons she could barely lift. While others learned stories of heroes, she learned exactly how many ways a Titan could kill you if you weren't prepared. The crossroads became her entire world, a place between places, existing in gaps that most beings passed through without noticing. Hecate transformed it into both sanctuary and training. Ground, somewhere Melinoë could grow strong without Chronos detecting her. And Hecate was demanding. Perhaps one of the most demanding teachers in all the realms. "Again," she would say, watching young Melinoë struggle with a spell or weapon form, sweat dripping, muscles trembling. The Titan will not pause to let you rest. He will not give you a second chance if you fail. Again. Melinoë never complained, never asked why she couldn't just play or rest, or be anything other than a weapon being forged. Perhaps she understood that this was her purpose, or perhaps she simply knew no other way to be. Their relationship was complicated. Hecate was teacher, guardian, and the closest thing Melinoë had to a mother. Yet Hecate repeatedly insisted she was not Melinoë's mother, becoming genuinely bothered whenever the younger woman implied otherwise. This created a strange dynamic. Hecate filled the maternal role in every practical way, but refused the title and emotional implications. Some players have theorized about why Hecate maintains this distance, with interpretations ranging from fear of attachment to complicated time loop scenarios. What we know for certain is that Hecate raised Melinoë with clear purpose, become strong enough to kill Chronos. As Melinoë grew, her personality crystallized into something markedly different from her brother. Where Zagreus had been warm and charming, quick to joke even facing death, Melinoë was serious and disciplined. She kept everything organized meticulously. She approached problems methodically. She formed few close bonds beyond her complicated relationship with Hecate. This wasn't coldness, it was focus. Melinoë had been shaped from birth to accomplish one thing. Everything else was secondary. Her combat style reflected this difference too. Zagreus fought like a warrior, blade, fist, bow, enhanced by divine boons but fundamentally physical. Melinoë became a witch-warrior hybrid, wielding nocturnal arms supplemented by deep magical knowledge. She learned to manage magic resource, to cast devastating omega attacks, to brew incantations in her cauldron. Her fighting required thinking several moves ahead, balancing immediate tactics with long-term resource management. One of the most visible signs of her sacrifice was her left arm. Lost in what the game describes as a sorcery-related accident while trying to help her friend Icarus, it was replaced by a spectral limb glowing with supernatural green light, bones visible beneath. It's a constant reminder of the costs of the path she walks. By the time Melinoë approached readiness, she had become exactly what Hecate intended, a Titan slayer with skills rivaling even the Olympians themselves. But she'd paid for that power with her childhood, her sense of self beyond the mission, and any real understanding of family beyond abstract duty. She studied the unfinished portrait obsessively. The mother she'd never known, the father who existed only, in stories, the brother who was already frozen in time by the point she could remember anything. She traced the brushstrokes, trying to feel some connection to these people she was supposed to love. "You don't remember them, besides this painting and your dreams," she would sometimes say to herself. "But still, you fight for them." This disconnect troubled her more than she admitted to anyone. How could she miss people she'd never known? How could she grieve for a childhood stolen when she had no memory of what it might have been? Her motivation came from duty, from prophecy, from being created for this specific purpose. Melinoë was a weapon aimed at a target. What happened after hitting that target? She'd given no thought to the question, because her entire identity was wrapped up in being the one who would kill Chronos. "Death to Chronos," she would say, and it defined her as much as her name. Chronos, the Titan they fear, and why he's not simple. Before we go further, we need to understand the enemy both siblings would face. Chronos is not just a villain to be defeated. He's the Titan of time, father of Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus. His story is complex, wrapped in ancient grievances and the tragedy of family turning against family. In Greek mythology, there's confusion between Chronos, time, and Chronos, harvest, two figures whose names are similar enough that ancient writers sometimes conflated them. Supergiant games embraced this deliberately, creating a Chronos who embodies aspects of both: the time manipulation of the primordial deity and the family dynamics of the Titan who fathered the Olympians. This Chronos ruled during what he calls his Golden Age. He claims it was a time of order and stability, though others dispute this. Aphrodite mentions finding his previous reign overall boring, suggesting whatever stability existed came at the cost of vitality and change. What's certain is that his children grew displeased. Hades, Poseidon, Zeus, and their allies rose up in the First Titan War. The conflict reshaped reality itself. Zeus wielded the legendary shield of Aegis. Hestia created a firearm so powerful she later cast it into Tartarus, fearing its potential in mortal hands. The war ended with Chronos' defeat, but not with clean death. His own children used his own scythe to tear him apart, scattering his pieces throughout Tartarus. It was cruel, perhaps, but the Olympians believed dismemberment was the only way to ensure he could never threaten them again. For eons, Chronos lay broken, fragments of consciousness trapped in endless darkness. The world he'd ruled was reshaped by his children. Time itself passed without him, which for the Titan of Time must have been particularly agonizing. But when his cult restored him, he was changed. Imprisonment had refined his understanding of his own nature. He'd learned to freeze moments, to lock beings in temporal stasis, to move through stopped time. This made him infinitely more dangerous than before. Yet what drove him wasn't just reclaiming power. It was the wound of betrayal. Being overthrown by his own children, torn apart by those he'd raised, trapped in powerlessness for eons. He wanted Hades to understand that feeling, wanted his son frozen while time flowed on, wanted the House of Hades to experience the helplessness he'd known. In person, Chronos carries himself with elegant affability. He speaks with the confidence of someone who has literally all the time in the world. He shows apathy toward Melinoë's challenges, viewing her efforts with almost paternal amusement. "How very spirited," he might say after she lands a good strike. "You truly think you can stop time? Well then, I would like to see you try." Physically, he towers over gods and mortals, his dark grey skin marked with golden scars from his dismemberment. His curved golden scythe extends to tremendous length in combat, and dark wings sprout from his back. He dresses with curious Egyptian aesthetics: white tunic with a golden hourglass, bangles, a collar embossed with clock numerals. He's formidable in combat, fighting with eons of experience, manipulating the battlefield through temporal distortions. But based on dialogue and his actions, he genuinely seems to believe his rule is better for the cosmos than the Olympians' chaos. Whether he truly believes this or has convinced himself to justify his revenge is left ambiguous. This complexity becomes crucial later, because the question facing Melinoë will be, can such a being be redeemed? Or do some betrayals run too deep? The mirror that connects past and future, the second twist. After countless runs through the Underworld, after defeating Chronos for the first time, temporarily, he always returns, being time itself, Melinoë reaches deeper into the conquered house of Hades. She finds her way to Zagreus' old bedroom. There, among the remnants of her brother's life, his possessions, his decorations, marks of the personality she'd only heard about, she finds the Mirror of Night. The Mirror of Night was an ancient artifact Zagreus had used to unlock talents and strengthen himself. It resided in his chambers, a dark glass reflecting not just the physical, but something deeper: potential, possibility, the threads of fate connecting past to future. When Melinoë approaches it, when she lays her hand upon its surface, something unprecedented occurs. The mirror recognizes her. Same blood as Zagreus, same divine essence. And it becomes a bridge, not just through space, but through time itself. Melinoë can reach backward, to the past, to before Chronos' attack, to Zagreus. The first contact is dreamlike. Zagreus, sleeping in his chambers in the past, finds himself in a vision. A young woman appears, features eerily similar to his own, heterochromia in mirror opposite, glowing feet, undeniable aura of family. She introduces herself as Melinoë, claims to be his sister, brings warning of catastrophe to come. "Chronos will return," she tells him urgently. "He will attack the house, imprison our father, our mother, you. I'm from the future, from after everything falls. I need your help." Zagreus is understandably skeptical. He'd been told Chronos was permanently vanquished, torn apart beyond any possibility of return. And he has no sister. Melinoë hasn't been born yet in his timeline. "This is a dream," he says. "I'll forget it when I wake." But Melinoë gives him proof, a task to verify her claims. "Seek out Hecate," she tells him. "Persephone's friend, the witch of the crossroads. Tell her what I've told you. If she confirms it, you'll know I speak truth." The vision ends. Zagreus wakes expecting it to fade, as dreams do. It doesn't. Every detail remains crystal clear. Despite all logic saying it's impossible, Zagreus knows with bone-deep certainty that something profound just happened. He seeks out Hecate, relays what he saw, mentions Melinoë and Chronos' return. Hecate's reaction confirms everything. She knows. She's always known, or will know, or time is complicated when you start communicating across it. Thus begins Zagreus' secret mission, preparing for a catastrophe that hasn't happened yet from his perspective, but is ancient history from his sisters. From that point forward, every time Melinoë defeats Chronos, she can return to the mirror and contact Zagreus in the past. These conversations are brief, the temporal connection is taxing, and secrecy is crucial, but they're precious beyond measure. For Melinoë, these are her first real family contacts. She can ask about their parents, learn details Hecate never shared, understand her family as real people rather than abstract concepts. Zagreus tells her about their father's rare smiles, their mother's laugh, how Cerberus loves being petted behind all three sets of ears. He brings to life the house of Hades as it was, transforming the place she only knew as Chronos' fortress into a home. For Zagreus, meeting Melinoë is revelation and responsibility. He learns he'll have a sister, that his family will know brief happiness before tragedy. The knowledge changes him, gives him purpose beyond testing the Underworld's security. Their conversations mix tactical planning with genuine sibling bonding. Melinoë asks him to investigate Chronos, weaknesses, history, anything useful. Zagreus pursues these investigations with determination, diving into ancient texts, speaking with those who remember the Titan War, gathering intelligence that will only prove useful in a future he'll never see from his own perspective. But they also simply talk as siblings do. Zagreus shares stories about his escape attempts, his relationships with Thanatos and Megaera, his complicated but loving bond with their father. Melinoë shares what she can about her life, training under Hecate, the resistance at the crossroads, struggling with being defined solely by prophecy. "You don't have to carry this alone," Zagreus tells her after she's lost to Chronos multiple times and is doubting her strength. "I know what it's like to feel like everything depends on you, but you're more than the Titan Slayer. You're my sister, and that matters regardless of whether you succeed." These words mean more to Melinoë than Zagreus realizes. Her entire life, she's been shaped to be a weapon. Success was the only acceptable outcome. Failure unthinkable because it would mean her entire existence had been pointless. To hear family acknowledge her worth beyond that purpose gives her something she didn't know she was missing. As their collaboration deepens, Zagreus gathers crucial information. He learns about Gigaros, a legendary weapon that could be empowered to truly kill Titans. He studies Chronos' nature, learning the Titan fears true dissolution in ways imprisonment never achieved. He discovers strategies that only work if you know exactly what you're looking for. But perhaps most importantly, Zagreus gives Melinoë the example of a different path. He healed his broken family through persistence, communication, and ultimately forgiveness. His relationship with Hades transformed from cold hostility to genuine respect through repeated attempts at connection. This example would prove crucial when Melinoë faced her ultimate choice regarding Chronos. Their bond, forged across timelines through the mirror, becomes something neither anticipated. The forged bond between them is later described as timeless, perfect for a relationship that literally transcended temporal boundaries, connecting past and future, allowing two people who'd never met in normal space-time to become genuinely close. Melinoë's War, the journey itself. When Melinoë finally descends into the Underworld proper, she's as prepared as anyone could be. Hecate tests her first, pulling no punches despite caring for her. The goddess even transforms Melinoë into a sheep at one point during their sparring, a moment of dark humor in an otherwise deadly serious trial. Melinoë proves herself capable, and Hecate allows her to proceed into Erebus. Death comes quickly and often in those early runs. For all her training, Melinoë isn't yet the Titan Slayer the prophecy speaks of. She dies to common enemies while learning their patterns. She dies to environmental hazards before understanding terrain. She dies because managing magic reserves while fighting for your life is harder in practice than training. But death isn't permanent for children of Hades. Each time she falls, Melinoë returns to the crossroads, analyzes what went wrong, adjusts her approach, tries again. Death to Chronos, she says, and begins another run. As she progresses deeper, through Erebus, through Oceanos, eventually reaching Tartarus itself, Melinoë encounters something unexpected. In the deepest pit, she finds a projection of Hades himself, still imprisoned, but able to grant boons to those fighting Chronos. When she first approaches him, she doesn't recognize her own father. How could she? She'd never seen Hades except in the unfinished painting, and imprisonment had changed him. Their exchanges become routine. He grants her power. She updates him on events in the Underworld and Olympus. Gradually, understanding dawns on both sides. Father and daughter acknowledge each other. It's not the reunion either might have hoped for. Hades still imprisoned, Melinoë still fighting toward uncertain victory, but its connection nonetheless. She also encounters Cerberus, the three-headed hound who guards the Underworld. But she finds him corrupted by Chronos' influence, forced to fight against her. It hurts to battle the family dog, to see him reduced to this hostile state. In alternate timelines accessed later, through the dissolution of time ritual, Melinoë glimpses memories, riding Cerberus as a child, her mother holding her safe as they laughed together. These glimpses show what Chronos stole from her. The Olympians become involved out of necessity. Chronos has laid siege to Olympus itself, raising armies of the dead to assault the gods. Even the mighty Olympians struggle against endless undead sustained by temporal manipulation. When they learn of Melinoë and the prophecy surrounding her, they offer boons eagerly, not just from kindness, but because her success is crucial to their survival. Apollo greets her warmly, calling her Sunshine. His sister Artemis, who had been close with Zagreus, forms a special bond with Melinoë as well. These gods and others grant powers complementing Melinoë's magic, making her increasingly formidable. But Melinoë never fully trusts the Olympians the way Zagreus had. They're necessary allies, not her people. They'd done nothing to prevent Chronos' attack. failed to rescue her family, seemed more concerned with their own preservation. She accepts their help, uses their boons to grow stronger, but keeps emotional distance. As her runs continue, as she grows more powerful, Melinoë begins truly embodying her role. She learns perfect magic management, knowing exactly when to unleash Omega attacks and when to conserve resources. She masters the nocturnal arms, switches between them fluidly based on situations. She unlocks powerful arcana cards, combining them into devastating builds. Chronos occasionally appears during runs, testing her, taunting gently. He seems amused by her determination, treating her attempts as entertainment rather than genuine threat. "How very spirited," he says after she survives one of his temporal traps. "You truly think you can stop time." But she does stop time, at least temporarily. She reaches Chronos in his throne room in the conquered house of Hades, confronts the Titan who stole everything. The battle demands everything she's learned, every skill Hecate drilled into her. Chronos fights with eons of experience, wielding his scythe with terrible precision, freezing moments around him, spawning adds to overwhelm her. Yet Melinoë perseveres. Through determination, skill, and perhaps prophecy's inevitability, she strikes Chronos down. Not permanently. He's time itself. He returns. But she proves she can defeat him. The prophecy isn't empty words. Years of training created exactly what was needed. "I'll return before long," Chronos promises as he falls. "After all, no one can stop time." "As many times as you return," Melinoë replies, "I'll be there to strike you down again." This first victory opens possibilities. She can now access more of the house, find the Mirror of Night, and begin communications with Zagreus, gather materials needed to truly end Chronos rather than merely delay him. The prophecy proved true in its first iteration. Now comes the harder question. What next? When siblings finally meet. The third twist. The post-game content brings what fans anticipated since the sequel's announcement. Direct confrontation between Melinoë and Zagreus. Through accepting a specific infernal contract, players can encounter Zagreus as a boss fight in Elysium. This isn't the past version Melinoë communicated with through the mirror. This is present-day Zagreus, freed from imprisonment after Melinoë's victories weakened Chronos' temporal locks enough for some prisoners to escape. The battle is mechanically challenging, demanding everything players learned about Melinoë's combat. Zagreus fights with skill and determination, using the infernal arms players remember from the original Hades, demonstrating the warrior style contrasting sharply with Melinoë's witch approach. But what makes these encounters special is the dialogue. Rather than bitter conflict, the fights are almost playful. They're clearly sparring rather than trying to truly harm each other, using combat as connection in the way divine beings often do. Zagreus makes jokes about the game's mechanics. "I always wanted to give you one of these," he says when offering his keepsake after a victory, referencing how keepsakes work as relationship progression markers. It's meta, acknowledging the artificial nature of their world while playing it straight emotionally. Melinoë suggests they should be sharing ambrosia instead of fighting. Zagreus counters that there's no need since she already has his keepsake, a tongue-in-cheek reference to how the relationship system works. Ambrosia traditionally comes after keepsakes, representing deeper bonds. These repeated encounters let siblings build relationship in real time rather than just across temporal distances. They learn each other's fighting styles, test limits, find family through combat. For Melinoë, it's the first time she's stood in the same physical space with family, while they're conscious and free. For Zagreus, it's a chance to be the older brother he saw himself becoming in that unfinished portrait. Through their clashes and conversations, Zagreus shares stories about their parents, about Cerberus, about the house when it was whole. He tells Melinoë how to properly interact with Cerberus so the great hound will accept her affection. He describes family dinners, Persephone's gardens, Hades' rare moments of warmth. Melinoë shares her own experiences. The resistance at the crossroads, training under Hecate, the weight of prophecy. Zagreus, who grew up feeling directionless until he found purpose, understands the burden of having too much purpose, of being defined by a single mission. "You're not just the Titan Slayer," Zagreus reminds her. "You're my sister. You're Melinoë. That's worth more than any prophecy." These words challenge assumptions Melinoë held her entire life. Hecate raised her to be a weapon, and she internalized that identity completely. But Zagreus sees her differently, as family first, as a person whose value exists independent of combat capabilities or destiny's demands. Their bond becomes one of the most significant relationships in Melinoë's life, perhaps rivaling or surpassing her complicated connection with Hecate. Where Hecate was teacher and guardian with clear purposes, Zagreus is family without qualification. He doesn't need Melinoë to be the Titan Slayer. He just wants his sister to be okay, to survive, to find happiness when the fighting ends. For players who loved Zagreus in the first game, these encounters are gifts. Seeing their favorite protagonist again, fighting alongside and against him, witnessing his growth since his own journey ended. For players focused on Melinoë, their chances to see her soften, to watch her form genuine connection her training and mission had prevented elsewhere. These fights also serve crucial narrative function beyond fan service. They demonstrate Melinoë succeeded in freeing at least part of her family. Zagreus is out, able to move and fight and live. Progress is being made. More importantly, these encounters plant seeds for what comes later. Zagreus' influence on Melinoë, his example of forgiveness and family reconciliation, his belief that even the worst conflicts can be resolved through understanding rather than just violence. All of this prepares her for the controversial choice she'll eventually make regarding Chronos. The controversial ending, and why it divided players. After defeating Chronos multiple times, gathering necessary materials, Melinoë empowers the legendary weapon Gigaros with Zagreus' help. This weapon, forged specifically to kill Titans permanently, gives her capability to end Chronos' existence truly and completely. No more resurrections, no more temporal manipulation allowing returns. She descends to Tartarus one final time, weapon in hand, ready to fulfill her life's purpose. The battle demands perfect execution, and she wins. Chronos falls, defeated, helpless, with Gigaros positioned to deliver the killing blow, ending him forever. But Melinoë hesitates. Through her communications with Zagreus, through their connection across timelines, a different plan emerged. What if instead of killing Chronos, they could change history? What if Zagreus could reach Chronos in the past, before the attack, and prevent the entire catastrophe? Melinoë asks Zagreus to spare the past version of Chronos, to try bringing him back into the family peacefully. Zagreus agrees. He finds Chronos in Tartarus in the past, speaks with him, and through methods the game doesn't fully detail, convinces the Titan to abandon revenge plans. Chronos agrees to be reintegrated into his family, to become a doting grandfather rather than vengeful destroyer. This creates an alternate timeline where Chronos never attacked. In this timeline, Melinoë grew up with her family intact, a loving grandfather who doted on her, parents who raised her themselves, a brother she knew from infancy. The portrait was finished. The memories of this timeline flood through everyone affected by the original history. Everyone except Hecate, who, for reasons tied to her nature and role, retains only memories of the darker timeline. In the present, these alternate memories cause Chronos to experience profound conflict. The grandfather who loved his family wars with the Titan who sought revenge. Ultimately, the grandfather wins. Chronos releases Hecate from her imprisonment. He'd captured her during the final battle. He expresses his transformation, his genuine desire to join the family rather than destroy it. And after understandable hesitation and anger, Hecate is furious, nearly striking Chronos down before Persephone and Hades convince her to stand down. The family accepts him. The ending shows Melinoë in the house of Hades, now being reconstructed. Hades, Zagreus and Persephone work on repairs while Chronos sits conversing with Nyx. There's tentative peace, with various characters expressing different comfort levels. Apollo and Artemis explicitly doubt whether Chronos can be trusted. Others seem willing to give him a chance. Melinoë accepts this outcome with little visible conflict, speaking with her family, including her grandfather, without the rage one might expect from someone who spent their entire life training to kill him. For many players and critics, this ending felt deeply unsatisfying. The primary criticism centers on agency. Melinoë spent her entire life preparing to kill Chronos. That was her choice, her mission, her identity. By having Zagreus make the crucial decision to spare the Titan in the past, the narrative arguably robbed Melinoë of agency over her own story. She becomes a supporting character in her brother's act of mercy, rather than protagonist of her own tale. This seems particularly problematic because Zagreus didn't experience what Melinoë experienced. He wasn't raised in isolation, wasn't molded into a weapon from infancy, didn't have his childhood stolen by Chronos. Yet he gets to decide whether the Titan deserves redemption, and Melinoë is expected to accept this. Second, there's the question of whether Chronos earned redemption. Yes, Zagreus convinced him to change in an alternate timeline. But in the prime timeline, the one we actually experienced, Chronos still committed terrible acts. He imprisoned gods, raised armies of the dead, robbed Melinoë of her childhood and family. Those actions happened. Those harms were inflicted. They happened recently from Melinoë's perspective. The ending seems to suggest creating an alternate timeline where Chronos was better somehow absolves him of crimes in the main timeline. But that's not how accountability works. The people who suffered in the prime timeline don't have their suffering erased because a different version of history exists where he was better. Third, the resolution happens quickly with minimal processing time. One moment Melinoë is fighting Chronos to kill him permanently, the next he's redeemed and sitting peacefully in the house. There's no extended dialogue where Chronos demonstrates genuine understanding of harm caused, no sustained period where he must earn trust through actions, no time for Melinoë to work through feelings about this massive shift. The game expects players to accept everything is fine, because alternate timeline memories softened hearts. But trauma doesn't work that way. Melinoë should be processing that her entire identity was built around a mission now being abandoned. The ending glosses over this in favor of moving quickly to tentative peace. However, defenders of the ending note several considerations. First, Hades as a franchise has always been about breaking cycles of family violence. The first game was about Zagreus healing the rift between Hades and Persephone, reconciling with his father despite years of conflict. Having Hades the suit continue that theme by showing even the worst family conflicts can potentially be resolved through mercy rather than violence is thematically consistent. Second, there's value in refusing the expected violent resolution. Video games, particularly roguelikes, often default to kill the final boss as ultimate solution. By choosing redemption over execution, Hades the Turk makes a statement about alternatives to violence even when violence seems justified. Third, the time manipulation means this isn't simply Chronos gets away with it. The alternate timeline isn't trick or illusion. It's genuine change in history affecting everyone, including Chronos. The Titan who is redeemed has literally experienced a different life and become a different person through that experience. Fourth, the ending leaves room for continued doubt. Characters explicitly question whether Chronos can be trusted, suggesting the story isn't treating his redemption as absolute or unproblematic. Post-game content allows players to continue exploring these themes. Still, the criticism that Melinoë deserved more agency is hard to dismiss. Even if thematically the choice to pursue redemption makes sense, the execution could have given Melinoë more active participation. She could have been the one to convince Chronos through the mirror rather than Zagreus doing it. She could have had extended conversations with her grandfather working through harm caused. She could have been given space to express rage and grief before accepting peace. The truth about their bond, the final reveal that changes everything. Before we conclude, there's one more thing you need to understand about Melinoë and Zagreus, something the game reveals through their forged bond description, through subtle dialogue, through the very mechanics of how they connect across time. Their bond is called timeless. At first, this seems like a poetic description. Of course, it's timeless. They communicate across different time periods through the mirror of night. But when you examine what actually happened, when you trace the full implications of their connection, something profound emerges. Consider this. Melinoë grew up with no family. Hecate raised her, yes, but explicitly refused to be called her mother. The unfinished portrait showed people she'd never met. Every relationship she formed at the crossroads was colored by her mission, by duty, by the constant awareness that she existed to kill Chronos. Then she finds the mirror of night, makes contact with Zagreus, and for the first time in her entire life, she experiences what family actually feels like. Not duty, not mission, but genuine connection with someone who cares about her regardless of her utility as a weapon. But here's what makes it profound. Zagreus gave her this before she ever succeeded in her mission, before she proved she could defeat Chronos, before she demonstrated she was the prophesied Titan Slayer. He accepted her as his sister immediately, valued her for who she was rather than what she could accomplish. "You're not just the Titan Slayer," he told her. "You're my sister. That's worth more than any prophecy." Those words, that acceptance, became the foundation for everything that followed, because Melinoë had spent her entire life being told her only value was in killing Chronos. Success was the only acceptable outcome. Failure would mean her entire existence had been pointless. Zagreus was the first person, the only person, who told her that wasn't true. Now consider what this means for their ending choice. When Melinoë hesitates to kill Chronos permanently, when she asks Zagreus to try the path of redemption instead of revenge, she's not abandoning her mission. She's applying what Zagreus taught her, that healing is possible, that family can be restored, that she has value beyond being a weapon. Zagreus showed her this not through his words about Chronos, but through how he treated her. He proved that someone torn from their family, raised without them, could still find connection. That siblings separated by impossible circumstances could still be family. That love doesn't require shared history. It requires shared choice. Their bond being called timeless isn't just about crossing temporal boundaries. It's about the fundamental truth that family, real family, exists outside of time's constraints. It transcends circumstances, transcends separation, transcends even death itself. Zagreus found family after dying as an infant and being brought back. Melinoë found family after being torn away in infancy and raised in isolation. Neither of them should have succeeded in building the connections they built. But they did anyway, because they chose to. And that choice, that persistent choice to connect despite impossible obstacles, is what ultimately allows them to imagine a different ending for Chronos. Not because the Titan earned redemption easily, not because justice doesn't matter, but because they've both lived the truth that family can be found even when it seems irretrievably lost. The controversial ending isn't about whether Chronos deserved forgiveness. It's about whether the cycle of family violence can be broken, and whether two siblings who barely know each other can trust each other enough to try a path neither could have walked alone. When you understand this, when you see how Melinoë's entire character arc is about learning that she's more than just a weapon, that her value exists independent of her mission, and that family means something beyond duty, the ending becomes less about Chronos and more about what Melinoë chooses to become after being defined by one purpose her entire life. She chooses to be someone who believes healing is possible, because her brother showed her it was possible by healing her. That's what timeless really means. What it all means, the story of Melinoë and Zagreus, is ultimately about what family means across impossible distances. Two siblings who should never have known each other, separated by catastrophe and time itself, yet finding connection regardless. Two children of the same parents emerging as wildly different people depending on context and upbringing, yet discovering that blood still matters, still creates bonds transcending those differences. Zagreus represents warmth, connection, the possibility of healing even deepest wounds through persistence and genuine care. He transformed his relationship with his father from cold hostility to genuine respect. He brought his mother back from exile. He proved family doesn't have to remain broken, that cycles of pain can be interrupted and redirected toward reconciliation. His journey was personal, driven by emotional need rather than external prophecy. He wanted to find his mother, understand his origins, feel like he belonged. Everything else flowed naturally from that core desire for connection. Melinoë represents discipline, purpose, the weight of expectations placed on someone from birth. She was shaped into the perfect Titan slayer through years of rigorous training, her path determined before she could walk. Her journey was prophesied, driven by duty rather than personal desire. She fought to save people she loved in abstract but didn't truly know. Everything about her life oriented toward the singular goal of defeating Chronos. Yet these different approaches complemented each other when they finally connected. Zagreus gave Melinoë warmth and family connection she'd been denied. Melinoë gave Zagreus purpose extending beyond his own timeline. Together, they achieved what neither could have done alone. They found a way to potentially break the cycle of family violence plaguing their bloodline for eons. The ending, controversial as it remains, represents the intersection of their philosophies. Zagreus's belief in redemption and family reconciliation meets Melinoë's power and determination to change what seems unchangeable. Whether you believe this intersection succeeds narratively, whether you think Melinoë deserved more agency in the choice, whether you accept that Chronos earned redemption, these are questions without simple answers. The Hades community remains divided, and perhaps that's appropriate for a story tackling questions of justice, mercy, family, and choice. What everyone can agree on, these siblings changed their worlds fundamentally. The Underworld. After Zagreus's journey was warmer, more open to connection. The cosmos after Melinoë's journey is one where even the worst family conflicts might find resolution beyond violence. They're heroes not because they killed the most monsters or defeated the most powerful foes, but because they transformed the fundamental nature of their relationships and their worlds. For us, these siblings offer different but equally valid ways to engage with the Hades universe. Those who loved Zagreus's charm and warmth, his relationship-focused journey, Find in him a protagonist who makes divine beings feel accessible and relatable. Those who appreciate Melinoë's discipline and focus, her complex relationship with duty and identity, find in her a protagonist grappling with deeper questions about purpose and choice. Together, they form a complete picture of what it means to be family, to be a hero, to face impossible odds and emerge changed but not broken. As you drift toward sleep, consider these two siblings separated by time and circumstance, but connected by blood and choice. Think about how Zagreus found warmth in cold halls of the underworld, how Melinoë found purpose in harsh training at the crossroads. Reflect on how they each proved that family bonds can transcend any obstacle, even death itself, even time. Their story reminds us there's no single right way to be a hero, no single path to healing broken relationships. Sometimes the answer is persistent warmth, like Zagreus offered. Sometimes it's disciplined focus, like Melinoë demonstrated. And sometimes it's finding someone whose strengths complement your weaknesses, whose presence makes you more complete than you could be alone. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the underworld and beyond, through past and future, through the complete family story of Hades. If you enjoyed this exploration of Melinoë and Zagreus, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. It helps others find these deep dives into game lore. Feel free to leave comments about your thoughts on the siblings, their story, and what you hope to see in future Hades 2 updates. Until next time, sleep well, and may your own family stories find their resolution, whatever form that takes. Death to Chronos, and long live the House of Hades. Had two siblings, two worlds, a deeper look. To truly understand the relationship between Melinoë and Zagreus, we need to examine how fundamentally different their experiences were, how two children of the same parents could emerge as such distinct beings. They shared blood, shared divine heritage, shared that striking heterochromia marking them both as children of Hades and Persephone. Both had those glowing feet that marked them as royal offspring. Both possessed determination bordering on obsessive. Zagreus died hundreds of times pursuing his mother. Melinoë attempted to kill Chronos over and over despite repeated failure. They shared that godly stubbornness, refusing to accept defeat as final. But beyond these surface similarities, their lives diverged in almost every way. Zagreus grew up knowing his family, even when that knowledge was complicated and painful. He spent his childhood in the House of Hades, surrounded by immortals who knew him, who watched him grow, who formed relationships with him over centuries. He trained with Achilles, who became mentor and friend. He was cared for by Nyx, who loved him even if she couldn't claim him as her son. He knew his father, even when that relationship was strained to breaking. His journey was about understanding his family's secrets and healing their wounds. But the family itself was never in question. They existed, they were present, they could be reached and reconciled with. Melinoë, by contrast, grew up with only the idea of family. The painting showed her what they looked like. Hecate's stories told her what they were like. But she had no direct experience of them. Her mother was a woman in an unfinished portrait, forever reaching toward a nursery she would never enter. Her father was a distant lord of the underworld she'd never met in person until she found him imprisoned and didn't even recognize him. Her brother was a legend, the charming prince whose exploits the Olympians spoke of with fondness, but he was also frozen in time along with the rest of their family. This fundamental difference shaped everything about who they became. Zagreus's rebellion was personal. He fought against his father's rules because he wanted to find his mother and understand his truth. His escapes were acts of defiance, yes, but they came from a place of seeking connection. Even when dying repeatedly to his father's blade, Zagreus was engaging with Hades, forcing a relationship even if that relationship was currently hostile. He was fighting to understand and ultimately heal family bonds. Melinoë's mission was abstract despite its intensity. She fought to save people she loved in theory but didn't know in practice. Her dedication came from duty, from prophecy, from the simple fact that she'd been raised from infancy to do this one thing. Where Zagreus chose his path, even if that choice came from emotional necessity, Melinoë never really had a choice. She was created, shaped, forged into a weapon aimed at a specific target. Their personalities reflected these different origins profoundly. Zagreus was warm because he had known warmth, even imperfectly. He joked in the face of death because he'd learned that relationships could survive conflict, that even his father's hostility couldn't truly destroy the bond between them. He was charming because he'd been raised among those who valued charm, who responded to personality and wit. He formed deep connections easily because he understood, fundamentally, that connection was possible. His polite manner toward even shades like Achilles showed he'd internalized respect for others regardless of status. Melinoë was serious because she'd been trained to be serious, because her entire existence was oriented toward a deadly goal that allowed no room for levity. She was disciplined because Hecate had required discipline from her earliest days, had never let her simply be a child. She kept her distance from others because emotional connections were, in a sense, a distraction from her purpose. She would fight alongside Nemesis, or interact politely with the Olympians, or care for the shade Dora. But none of these relationships truly penetrated the core of who she was, the Titan Slayer, singular and focused. Even their physical appearances, despite the shared heterochromia and glowing feet, spoke to their differences. Zagreus was muscular, built like a warrior through Achilles' training, his physique reflecting the direct, physical nature of his combat style. His hair was dark and spiky like his mother's, wild and untamed. He dressed practically, but with a certain casual flair, the attire of someone comfortable in his own skin. His bare feet glowed warmly, leaving brief traces of fire in his wake. Melinoë was slender, her build more suited to the agile, magic-enhanced combat she practiced. Her wheat blonde hair, though worn short now, showed her mother's coloring, but her father's soft curls when allowed to grow longer, as seen in flashbacks. She dressed deliberately in a saffron robe adorned with lunar symbols, her appearance carefully crafted and controlled. Even her spectral left arm, glowing green with visible bones beneath, spoke to a life marked by sacrifice and transformation in service to her mission. She wore a laurel wreath that glowed like embers, similar to her brother's, and a crescent moon parted her bangs. In combat, these differences became even more pronounced. Zagreus was a warrior who fought like a warrior, blade and fist and bow, enhanced by divine boons but fundamentally physical in his approach. He could take tremendous punishment and keep fighting, could go toe-to-toe with champions and monsters and his own father. His was the path of the hero, direct and straightforward, meeting obstacles head-on and overcoming them through determination and skill. When faced with a problem, Zagreus hit it until it stopped being a problem. Melinoë was a witch who happened to fight, or perhaps a fighter who happened to practice witchcraft. The line blurred until it was meaningless. She wielded her nocturnal arms with skill, yes, but she supplemented every strike with magic, every engagement with careful management of her magic reserves and her Omega abilities. She could cast hexes granted by the moon goddess Selene, could draw power from arcana cards, could brew incantations in her cauldron to enhance her capabilities. Her combat style required thinking several moves ahead, balancing resource management with moment-to-moment tactics. When faced with a problem, Melinoë analyzed it, found its weakness, and exploited it with precision. Their relationships with the divine differed as well. Zagreus had charmed the Olympians through personality and persistence, had won their friendship and support through being genuinely likable and interesting. They gave him boons because they liked him, because they wanted to see the charming prince succeed in his seemingly impossible quest. He formed genuine friendships with gods like Artemis and Dionysus, genuine romances with Thanatos and Megaera. Even his father eventually came to respect and love him. Melinoë approached the Olympians with far more pragmatism. She needed their help, and they needed hers. Chronos threatened both Olympus and the Underworld, making them allies of necessity. She formed genuine friendships with some, particularly Artemis and Apollo, the latter calling her Sunshine with the same warmth he'd shown Zagreus. But she never fully trusted most of them. They were the family she doesn't like, as Dora the Shade put it, necessary allies, but not truly her people. Her loyalty was to the imprisoned house of Hades, to Hecate and the resistance at the crossroads, not to the gods of Olympus who had, after all, done nothing to prevent Chronos' return or free her family in all the years since his attack. Yet for all these differences, unexpected similarities emerged. Both siblings possessed an intense determination bordering on obsessive. Zagreus had died hundreds of times in pursuit of his mother and his truth, never giving up no matter how many times he failed. Melinoë would attempt to kill Chronos over and over, each death merely a setback on the path to eventual victory. They shared that godly stubbornness that refused to accept defeat as final, that kept pushing forward no matter how impossible the goal seemed. Both were deeply loyal to those they considered family, even if family meant different things to them. Zagreus fought to heal his broken family, and succeeded, bringing Hades and Persephone back together, earning his father's respect and love. Melinoë fought to free her imprisoned family, even though she didn't truly know them, driven by duty that transcended personal connection. Both carried the weight of prophecy and expectation. Zagreus had defied the fates' decree that Hades would have no heir simply by existing, by returning from the death that should have been permanent. Melinoë bore the prophecy that she would overthrow Chronos, that she would succeed where all others had failed. They were both impossible children, ones who shouldn't exist but did, ones who defied expectations and altered destinies simply by refusing to accept the limitations placed upon them. Most significantly, both had the capacity for growth and change that many immortals lacked. Zagreus transformed from a frustrated, somewhat aimless prince into a bridge builder who healed ancient wounds. Melinoë would eventually have to confront what it meant to be something more than just a weapon, to decide whether revenge or redemption was the path forward, to discover an identity beyond the mission that had defined her entire existence. But perhaps the deepest connection between them, the one that transcended their differences and would eventually become crucial to both their fates, was simply this: they were brother and sister. That bond, stretched across time and imprisonment and completely different life experiences, would prove stronger than any of them anticipated. When Melinoë finally made contact with Zagreus through the Mirror of Night, when she reached across time to the past before Chronos' attack, that familial connection would anchor them both. Zagreus, who had fought so hard for family, who valued connection above almost all else, would not hesitate to help his sister, even though he didn't yet know she existed from his temporal perspective. Melinoë, who had no personal memory of her brother but had been told of him all her life, would find in him the first true family connection she'd ever experienced. Their relationship, forged across timelines and in the face of impossible odds, would become something that neither destiny nor the Titan of Time himself could break. It would become the foundation for everything that followed, the bridge between past and future, the connection that made possible an ending that neither of them could have achieved alone. The mentor figures, how they shaped different heroes. The person who raises you shapes you in profound ways. For Zagreus and Melinoë, their mentor figures could not have been more different, and those differences echo through every aspect of who they became. Achilles, the legendary warrior of Troy, resided in Elysium among the honored dead. He had trained Zagreus at Hades' command, tasked with giving the prince direction and purpose. But Achilles brought more than combat expertise to his teaching. He brought genuine warmth, treating Zagreus with respect rather than condescension, despite the vast difference in their experiences. He spoke to the young god as an equal, a friend, someone whose company he valued beyond the simple teacher-student dynamic. Take one look at him, and I think any questions of his parentage are soon resolved, Achilles wrote of Zagreus in his private observations. He noted how the prince took well to martial training, exhibiting his father's might and even greater swiftness. But what startled Achilles most was Zagreus's kindness, his congenial manner toward a mere shade when gods were not known for such consideration. This warmth between mentor and student created space for Zagreus to develop his personality fully. Achilles didn't demand that Zagreus become a particular type of person or suppress certain aspects of himself. He taught combat, yes, but he also taught through example what it meant to maintain one's humanity, or something like it, even in death, how to treat others with dignity, how to find meaning in training and purpose beyond just becoming stronger. Nyx, too, served as a mentor figure to Zagreus, though in a different capacity. As the primordial goddess of night, one of the oldest beings in existence, she had raised Zagreus when he was believed to be her son. Even after the truth emerged, her devotion never wavered. She actively facilitated his escape attempts by entrusting him with the Mirror of Night, interceded with the Olympians on his behalf, and stood as his defender against Hades' more toxic parenting. With Nyx, Zagreus learned that maternal love could exist without possession or control. She supported his choices even when they meant he would leave the Underworld, even when they brought him into conflict with Hades. She gave him the tools and encouragement he needed to find his own truth, never demanding that he become who she wanted him to be. This unconditional support allowed Zagreus to develop confidence in his own judgment, to trust his own instincts, even when they went against authority. Hecate's approach to mentoring Melinoë could not have been more different. From Melinoë's earliest memories, Hecate was teacher first and always. The relationship was defined by rigorous training, by constant testing, by expectations that seemed almost impossibly high. Hecate did not coddle or offer unearned praise. When Melinoë succeeded, Hecate acknowledged it and immediately pushed her to the next level. When Melinoë failed, Hecate's response was simple: again. This wasn't cruelty, though it might have seemed harsh to outsiders. Hecate truly believed that nothing less than perfection would be sufficient for Melinoë to defeat Chronos. The Titan of Time was too powerful, too ancient, too cunning to be overcome by anything less than a warrior witch forged to flawless precision. Every moment of gentleness, every allowance for childish play or rest, could mean the difference between victory and eternal imprisonment for everyone Hecate cared about. Yet despite this intensity, Hecate cared for Melinoë deeply. She attended to her needs, ensured she was healthy and well-equipped, taught her not just combat, but the broader knowledge she would need. When young Melinoë played hide-and-seek, Hecate played with her, though even these games served a training purpose. She told stories of the family Melinoë had lost, preserving those memories even though doing so must have been painful for the goddess who had failed to protect them. But Hecate maintained strict boundaries. She repeatedly insisted that she was not Melinoë's mother, becoming genuinely annoyed when the younger woman implied otherwise. This insistence created a strange dynamic. Hecate filled the maternal role in every practical sense, but refused the title and the emotional implications that came with it. Various theories exist within the community about why Hecate maintains this distance. Some players interpret it as fear that accepting the maternal role would make her too soft, would compromise the ruthless training Melinoë needed. Others suggest Hecate worried about becoming too attached to someone who would inevitably face mortal danger. Still others point to certain cryptic dialogues and suggest there may be deeper, more complicated reasons related to time loops or alternate timelines, though these remain largely speculative interpretations rather than confirmed canon. What we know for certain is that Hecate raised Melinoë with laser focus on a single goal: become strong enough to kill Chronos. Everything else was secondary. The difference in mentorship styles created different results. Zagreus learned to fight like a hero, brave, straightforward, trusting in his own strength and the support of those around him. He developed confidence that he was worthy of love and respect, that his value went beyond his combat abilities or his usefulness to others. This foundation allowed him to form deep relationships, to charm gods and monsters alike, to approach challenges with optimism even in the face of repeated failure. He learned that persistence, warmth, and genuine connection could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Melinoë learned to fight like a weapon, precise, efficient, utterly focused on the mission. She developed incredible discipline and skill, but at the cost of spontaneity and emotional openness. She measured her worth by her capability, by how close she was to being ready to defeat Chronos. Relationships were secondary to the mission, and she kept most people at arm's length as a result. She approached challenges methodically rather than optimistically, trusting in preparation and strategy rather than hope or charm. Yet both mentoring approaches succeeded in their own ways. Achilles and Nyx raised Zagreus to be someone capable of the emotional intelligence needed to heal his broken family, to bridge divides, to see past old wounds to the possibility of reconciliation. He became someone who could bring warmth to the cold halls of the Underworld, who could make even Hades himself learn to express affection. His journey succeeded not through superior combat skills alone, but through his ability to form genuine connections with everyone he met. Hecate raised Melinoë to be someone capable of standing against the Titan of Time himself, to wield power that even the Olympians struggled to match, to never give up no matter how many times she failed. She became someone who could face impossible odds with unwavering determination, who could analyze her enemies' weaknesses and exploit them with precision, who could turn herself into exactly the weapon needed to accomplish her mission. The tragedy, of course, is that Melinoë needed what Zagreus had, that emotional foundation, that sense of being loved for who she was rather than what she could accomplish. And Zagreus would have benefited from more of what Melinoë received, that discipline, that tactical thinking, that willingness to push past comfort to achieve the seemingly impossible. Perhaps that's why their eventual connection across time would prove so significant. Through each other, they could access what their own upbringings had denied them. Zagreus could share his warmth and charm, his belief in the power of connection and forgiveness. Melinoë could share her discipline and focus, her understanding that some enemies cannot be defeated through charm alone, that preparation and strategy matter as much as heart. And both had mentors who, despite their vastly different approaches, fundamentally wanted the same thing: for their students to succeed, to find purpose, to become more than what fate had initially decreed. Achilles took pride in Zagreus's growth, seeing in him not just a skilled warrior, but someone who retained his humanity despite being a god. Nyx supported him unconditionally, giving him the foundation he needed to believe in himself. Hecate pushed Melinoë relentlessly toward her destiny, forging her into someone capable of challenging time itself. All of them, in their own ways, loved the children they trained. And that love, expressed through such different methods, shaped two heroes who would each, in their own way, transform their world. The house that was lost, and what it meant. To understand what Chronos stole when he attacked, we need to understand what the House of Hades had become by the time Melinoë was born. Not the cold, administrative place Zagreus grew up in, but what it transformed into after his journey ended. The House of Hades sits at the heart of the Underworld, a massive structure that serves as both royal residence and administrative center for all of death itself. Before Zagreus' rebellion, it functioned with rigid efficiency. Hades ruled from his desk, processing the endless paperwork of mortality with the same attention to detail he applied to everything. Shades performed their duties. The rivers flowed. Death was administered with bureaucratic precision. But it was cold, emotionally distant. A workplace more than a home. Zagreus changed that not through conquest, but through connection. His escape attempts, his relationships with the household staff, his eventual reconciliation with his parents, all of it gradually warmed a place that had been frozen in formality for eons. When Persephone returned, she brought literal life to the realm of death. Gardens began to flourish in impossible places. The queen's chambers, long empty, were filled with growing things that shouldn't be able to survive in the underworld, but did anyway through her power. She moved through the halls with grace and warmth, greeting shades and gods alike with genuine interest in their well-being. Hades himself changed, though subtly. He still maintained his administrative duties with the same precision, still ruled with firm authority. But those who knew him well could see the difference. He smiled more, genuine expressions rather than the sardonic grimaces he'd worn before. He spoke with Persephone about matters beyond just business. He even acknowledged Zagreus' accomplishments, eventually assigning him the official task of testing the underworld's security through continued escape attempts. The household staff noticed the change too. Hypnos still slept at his post, but now it was treated with affectionate exasperation rather than stern disapproval. Nyx continued her duties as house manager, but with less tension, more ease. Even Cerberus, the three-headed guard dog, seemed happier, receiving pets and treats from family members who now had time to acknowledge his presence beyond just his function as guardian. This was the house that welcomed Melinoë's birth. Relationships that had been purely professional became tinged with genuine friendship. Achilles and Patroclus, reunited through Zagreus' efforts, could be seen together in Elysium, finally at peace after millennia of separation. Orpheus and Eurydice sang together once more, their music floating through the halls. Even Megaera, stern fury that she was, allowed herself moments of warmth when visiting Zagreus. The house hosted gatherings, something previously unthinkable. Gods from Olympus visited not just on official business, but socially. Dinners were held where family and friends ate together, laughed together, shared stories. The rigid hierarchy that had defined the place for eons loosened enough to allow genuine connection while still maintaining the essential structure needed to keep death functioning properly. When the painting was commissioned to mark Melinoë's birth, it represented more than just a new family member. It represented the culmination of everything Zagreus had fought for, a family that was genuinely whole, genuinely happy, genuinely capable of expressing love for one another. Zagreus looked at his baby sister with immediate protective affection, already imagining teaching her to fight, to navigate the complexities of being a child of both life and death. He planned to show her secret passages through the house, to introduce her to all his friends, to share with her the family he'd worked so hard to rebuild. She would never know the loneliness he'd felt, would never have to fight for her place. She would simply belong from the very beginning. Hades holding his daughter for the first time, allowed himself to hope that perhaps the fates' prophecy had truly been defeated. He had one heir who existed despite their decree. Why not two? Perhaps this time there would be no tragedy, no loss. Perhaps they could simply be a family, complicated and divine as they were, but together. Persephone saw in Melinoë a future where her children could grow up with both parents present, where the mistakes and pain of the past wouldn't define the next generation. She planned gardens specifically for her daughter, flowers that would bloom in colors matching Melinoë's eyes, green and red, life and death, spring and underworld combined. The House of Hades, for that brief period between Melinoë's birth and Chronos' attack, was truly a home. Not perfect. Gods rarely achieve perfection in their personal lives, but genuine, warm, full of the kind of love that develops slowly through persistent effort and forgiveness and choosing connection over conflict. This is what Chronos destroyed when he attacked. He didn't just imprison gods, he didn't just seize control of the underworld's administrative functions. He shattered the hard-won peace, the carefully built relationships, the transformation from cold efficiency to genuine warmth. He froze that moment of family happiness as surely as he froze Hades and Zagreus and Persephone themselves, trapping them eternally in temporal stasis while time flowed on without them. The house under Chronos' rule became something different, cold again, but not with administrative efficiency, with the chill of conquest. The Titan set up his throne in what had been the Great Hall. His loyal followers, the satyrs bearing hourglass symbols, moved through corridors where once friends had gathered. The undead raised from the river Styx served where once shades had worked of their own accord. It was a house occupied rather than inhabited, controlled rather than loved. Melinoë, growing up in the crossroads, heard stories of what the house had been. Hecate told her about dinners where the family ate together, about Zagreus' mischief, about Persephone's gardens, about the warmth that had filled those halls before Chronos took it all away. But stories aren't the same as experience. Melinoë could imagine what she'd lost, but she couldn't truly feel it, couldn't understand in her bones what it meant to have a home like that. When she finally began her runs through the underworld, when she fought her way through Erebus and Oceanus, and eventually reached the house itself, what she found was a conquered fortress. The gardens were dead or dying. The halls echoed with emptiness. The warmth was gone, replaced by the cold certainty of Chronos' control. It must have been strange for her, moving through these spaces she'd heard about all her life but had never seen. Walking through her brother's old room, seeing his decorations, his possessions, the traces of a life lived. Finding the mirror of night that would eventually let her contact him across time. Discovering places where her family had been happy, now twisted into strongholds and battlegrounds. The House of Hades, in its conquered state, was a constant reminder of what Chronos had stolen. Not just family members, but an entire way of being, a transformation from cold duty to genuine love that had taken Zagreus' entire journey to achieve and Chronos mere moments to destroy. When Melinoë fights to reclaim the house, she's not just fighting to free her imprisoned family. She's fighting to restore that possibility of warmth, to give back to her family the home they'd built together. She's fighting for something she never personally experienced, but understood was precious beyond measure. A place where family could be genuinely happy, where love could be expressed openly, where even the realm of death itself could feel like home. This is why the ending, where the house is being reconstructed with family members working together on repairs, carries such weight. Whether you agree with how the story handles Chronos' redemption or not, that image of family rebuilding their home together represents the restoration of what was stolen, Not just freedom from imprisonment, but the possibility of that warmth returning, of the House of Hades once again becoming more than just an administrative center or a conquered fortress. It represents the hope that what was broken can be repaired, that what was lost can be found again, that even after the worst betrayals and most devastating attacks, family might find their way back to each other and rebuild what was shattered. The Crossroads, Melinoë's home that wasn't. While the House of Hades represented everything stolen from Melinoë, the Crossroads represented everything she actually had, which in many ways made it even more important to her, despite being less grand, less connected to her family legacy. The Crossroads exists between worlds, in liminal spaces most beings pass through without noticing. It's neither here nor there, neither one realm nor another. It's the moment between sleeping and waking, the threshold between inside and outside, the border where one thing becomes another. Hecate had long used it for her duties as goddess of boundaries and transitions, but after rescuing Melinoë, she transformed it into something more, a sanctuary, a training ground, and ultimately a base of resistance. When Melinoë's earliest memories formed, they formed here. The Crossroads was her entire world for years. She knew its mists intimately, could navigate its shifting paths with eyes closed, understood its strange temporal properties that made it resistant to even Chronos' power over time. It was home, even if it wasn't the home she was supposed to have. Hecate shaped the space to suit their needs. A training area where Melinoë could practice with weapons and magic without drawing attention from the Underworld proper. A living space, modest but functional, where the unfinished portrait hung on the wall as constant reminder of what had been stolen. A chamber where Hypnos slept his eternal sleep, undisturbed by the chaos he'd slept through. And at the center of it all, the great cauldron where Hecate taught Melinoë the arts of brewing incantations and mixing reagents. As Melinoë grew older and the resistance began to form, the Crossroads expanded to accommodate more denizens. Nemesis arrived, daughter of Nyx, goddess of retribution. From the beginning, she established a competitive relationship with Melinoë, constantly challenging her to contests of who could eliminate more enemies. Nemesis resented that Melinoë was prophesied to be the one to defeat Chronos, feeling she herself was more capable. Yet despite this rivalry, Nemesis fought alongside Melinoë, grudgingly respecting her fellow warrior's dedication, if not her methods. Dora, a shade, shared Melinoë's tent. She had died so long ago that she remembered nothing of her mortal life, and her moods swung wildly between friendly and mischievous. Hecate warned Melinoë to be wary, citing rumors that Dora was vengeful and untrustworthy. But Melinoë, perhaps seeing in Dora's forgotten past echoes of her own lost family memories, treated the shade with kindness despite Hecate's warnings. Other shades and minor gods joined them over time, each contributing to the resistance in their own way. The Crossroads gradually transformed from a hiding place into something resembling a community, a ragtag band of rebels united in opposition to Chronos' rule, even if they had little else in common. Yet it never felt like the House of Hades must have felt in its golden age. The Crossroads was defined by purpose, by mission, by the constant awareness that they existed in hiding, that discovery meant destruction. There were no family dinners here, no gatherings for the sake of simple socializing. Everything had a function, everything served the mission. Melinoë's daily routine in the Crossroads reflected this focus. She woke early, trained with Hecate until exhaustion forced rest, studied incantations and combat theory, trained more, spoke with whatever allies had information or requests, and then attempted another run into the Underworld. Wash, rinse, repeat. Day after day, year after year, building toward the moment when she would be strong enough to truly challenge Chronos. The relationships she formed here were important, but different from what Zagreus had experienced in the House of Hades. Where Zagreus had built genuine friendships and romances, Melinoë formed alliances and working relationships. She cared about the people at the crossroads, certainly, but always with that slight distance, that awareness that her mission had to come first, that emotional attachments could become weaknesses if they distracted her from her purpose. This wasn't coldness, it was self-protection. Melinoë understood on some level that everyone at the crossroads was there because of what Chronos had done. They were all displaced, all fighting against the same enemy, all defined by what they'd lost or what they opposed. If Melinoë let herself become too attached, if she allowed herself to truly open up, then failure would mean letting down not just abstract family members she'd never known, but people she genuinely cared about in the present. The crossroads also served a practical function as the game's hub area, where players could upgrade Melinoë's abilities, interact with characters, and prepare for the next run. The cauldron allowed crafting of incantations. The Arcana altar let players unlock and upgrade mystical tarot-like cards granting various benefits. Training dummies, including Scelemeus, who served a similar function to Skelly from the first game, but with a different personality, let players practice combat techniques. But beyond its practical functions, the crossroads represented something philosophically important. A place between states, neither conquered nor free, neither home nor exile, neither past nor future. It existed in possibility, in potential, in the space where change could happen. In a sense, it was the perfect place for Melinoë to grow up, because her entire purpose was about transition, about ending one state of affairs, Chronos' rule, and beginning another, her family's freedom. When players return to the crossroads after runs, after deaths, after victories and defeats, they're returning to this liminal space where preparation meets reflection, where past attempts inform future strategies, where the impossible gradually becomes merely difficult and eventually achievable. It's not comfortable like a true home might be, but it's familiar, and for Melinoë, that familiarity was perhaps more valuable than comfort could have been. The contrast between the crossroads and the House of Hades tells you everything you need to know about the difference between Zagreus' journey and Melinoë's. Zagreus left home to find family. Melinoë left a place of preparation to reclaim a home she'd never known. He fought to escape a place that felt stifling. She fought to break into a place that represented everything stolen from her. And when the story eventually concludes, when family is reunited and the House of Hades begins to be reconstructed, Melinoë faces a choice that the game handles with interesting subtlety. Does she move into the House of Hades with her family, or does she remain at the crossroads? Based on dialogue, it seems Melinoë chooses to stay at the crossroads while visiting her family in the house. This choice speaks volumes about who she is. The crossroads, for all its imperfections, is where she grew up. It's where Hecate raised her, where the resistance formed, where she trained to become who she is. It's the closest thing she has to home, even if it was never meant to be permanent. Perhaps there's wisdom in that choice. Perhaps Melinoë understands that you can't simply step into a life you never lived, that the home in the unfinished portrait isn't one she can truly claim. Or perhaps she needs that space between, that place of transition, because her entire identity has been built around preparation and change rather than settled domesticity. Either way, the crossroads, that place between places, that sanctuary in liminal space, remains central to who Melinoë is. It's where she became herself, for better or worse. It's the foundation upon which everything else was built. And unlike the House of Hades with its complicated history of coldness and warmth and loss, the crossroads is simply, purely hers.